My name's Rachel Whitmore. I'm 33 years old. On my wedding day, my mother-in-law took the microphone, looked at 150 guests, and said, "We're so happy to welcome Rachel into the family. She's not from money like us, but she's got a good heart." Everyone laughed politely. My husband, Daniel, squeezed my hand under the table like that would fix it. My own mother stared at her plate. I smiled the way I'd learned to smile for 3 years, like nothing had landed. What none of them knew was that in 4 weeks, I'd be standing in front of that same family, reading a document that would end the wedding toast for good. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the Whitmores. They lived outside Greenwich, Connecticut, in a stone house with a circular driveway and a name for the property, Ashcombe. My father-in-law, Richard Whitmore, was 61, a man who'd built a logistics company from a single warehouse into a regional empire. My mother-in-law, Pamela, sat on 3 charity boards and never let anyone forget it. Daniel's older sister, Charlotte, was a corporate lawyer engaged to a hedge fund analyst named Grant. I was a freelance bookkeeper. I worked out of a converted garage in Stamford, reconciling small business accounts for a handful of local clients. When I met Daniel at a mutual friend's barbecue, he never asked what car I drove or where I'd gone to school. That's why I married him. His family was a different story. At the engagement dinner, Pamela asked me, in front of everyone, "And what does your father do, dear?" When I told her he'd retired from driving a delivery truck, she smiled and said, "How practical," and turned back to her wine. For 2 years, I absorbed it. The seating charts that put me at the end of the table. The Christmas gift that was, without fail, a generic gift card while Charlotte received jewelry. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself Daniel was the one I married, not his mother. But that night, at my own wedding, standing in a dress I'd saved for 8 months to afford, I realized something had been sitting in my inbox for 3 days that I hadn't opened yet. An email from Richard Whitmore's former accountant. Subject line, "You need to see this before Saturday." I hadn't read it. I hadn't had time. I would read it 4 weeks later, in front of all of them, and by the time I finished, no one in that room would be laughing. 2 days after the wedding, I finally opened that email in my car outside my office. My hands were still cold from the honeymoon send-off breakfast, where Pamela had spent 20 minutes explaining to a table of relatives how she'd taken a chance, letting Daniel marry outside their circle. The email was from a woman named Denise Okafor. She'd worked as Richard Whitmore's personal accountant for 11 years. Before being let go in March, her message was 4 paragraphs long. Careful, almost frightened in its wording. Asterisk Rachel, I don't know you well, but I know what your family does for a living. And I know Richard's opinion of people who work with their hands for a paycheck. I think you deserve to know what I found before I was terminated. I was told to stay quiet. I won't anymore. Asterisk. Attached were 3 PDF files, bank statements, a shell account registered under a name I didn't recognize, Ashcombe Holdings Group, transfers, monthly, going back 4 years. Denise's note explained the rest. Richard hadn't built his empire as cleanly as the family liked to claim. Vendor invoices had been inflated. Money moved through an account that didn't officially exist. Skimmed straight from the company his own employees depended on for their pensions. I sat there in my car for a long time. I thought about Pamela calling my father's job practical, with that little smile. I thought about the seating chart. I thought about the toast. She's not from money like us. I didn't respond to Denise right away. I saved the files in 3 separate places. Then I called Daniel. "I need to show you something," I said. "But not yet. Not until I understand it." For the next 2 weeks, I did what I do best. I opened those statements the way I open any client's books, line by line, transaction by transaction. I cross-referenced dates with company filings I found through public records. I built a spreadsheet. I found a second shell account Denise hadn't even mentioned. By the third week, I had 11 pages of documentation. Numbers that didn't lie. Dates that lined up perfectly with 3 family emergency trips Richard had taken to the Caymans. Daniel's family had spent 2 years treating me like an outsider who'd married up. Who should be grateful for scraps at the family table? They had no idea, the outsider. They'd dismissed knew exactly how to read a balance sheet. And they had no idea that Pamela had just sent me an invitation gold embossed, insufferably formal, to the family's annual founders' dinner. 50 guests, Richard's business partners, city council members. The kind of night where Pamela loved to remind everyone exactly who the Whitmores were, IRSVPD, yes. The founders' dinner was held at the Belmont Club, a private venue overlooking the harbor where Richard hosted the same event every October. 50 guests, round tables with hand-lettered place cards, a string quartet that played just loud enough to remind everyone they were somewhere expensive. I wore navy blue. Simple, tailored, nothing that screamed for attention. Aunt Dolores, my mother's older sister, the only person in my own family who knew what I'd found, had helped me practice in her kitchen the night before. Don't shake, she told me. Numbers don't shake. Let them do the talking. Daniel didn't know yet. I'd decided that much. If I told him beforehand, he'd spend the whole dinner watching me instead of watching his father. And I needed Richard relaxed. I needed him confident. We arrived at 7. Pamela greeted me with a hug that lasted exactly as long as the photographer's flash. Rachel, so glad you could join us properly this time, she said, loud enough for the guests nearby to hear. Properly. As if my wedding hadn't counted. Richard held court near the bar, laughing with the city councilman about a new distribution contract. Charlotte and Grant arrived fashionably late, Charlotte in emerald silk, already scanning the room to see who was watching her. Dinner started at 8. Halfway through the second course, Richard stood, tapping his glass. This was tradition, the founder's toast. The same speech in a slightly different order every year. About legacy, about family, about the Whitmore name meaning something in this town for 3 generations. And of course, he said, near the end, glancing my way with the same practiced warmth Pamela always used, we're delighted to have new additions to that legacy. Even ones who remind us how far little hard work and a good marriage can take a person. A ripple of polite laughter. Pamela beamed. Charlotte smirked into her wine glass. I felt the folder in my lap. 11 pages. Printed and paper-clipped. Sitting there like it had been waiting its whole life for this exact moment. I stood up. The room quieted the way rooms do when someone breaks. A pattern nobody expected broken. Richard blinked, still holding his glass, his smile faltering just slightly. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Since we're talking about legacy tonight, I think there's something everyone at this table deserves to hear. I opened the folder. It's about the Ashcombe Holdings account. I think you'll all find the numbers very interesting. Richard's glass didn't shake, but his face went the color of the tablecloth. Rachel. Richard's voice came out low, controlled. The tone he probably used on employees before firing them. Whatever you think you have, this isn't the place. I disagree, I said. You just gave a toast about legacy. I think everyone deserves to know exactly what that legacy is built on. Pamela's hand had gone still on the tablecloth. Charlotte was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on her before, not smugness, not condescension, fear. I began to read. Not everything, I didn't need to. Just enough. The name of the shell account. The dates of the 3 family emergency trips to the Caymans. That lined up exactly with 6-figure transfers. The vendor invoices inflated by amounts that matched almost to the dollar. The deposits into an account under a name none of the 50 people in that room recognized except one man. Sitting frozen at the head of the table, Denise Okafor worked for your company for 11 years. I said, looking directly at Richard now. You let her go in March after she asked questions about this account. I don't think she was wrong to ask. Someone at a nearby table murmured Denise's name. A city councilman 2 seats down had gone very still, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. I recognized the look on his face. A man doing quiet math about his own name attached to Richard's contracts. This is a private family matter, Pamela said, her voice cracking at the edges of its usual polish. Rachel, sit down. You made it public the day you decided to announce, in front of 150 people, that I wasn't from money like you. I kept my voice even. You don't get to call it private. Now that the money in question doesn't look so clean. Daniel hadn't said a word. I hadn't looked at him yet. I couldn't. Not without losing the thread of what I needed to say. But I felt him beside me, and when I finally glanced over, his face wasn't shocked. It was something closer to relief, like a door he'd been leaning against. His whole life had finally been allowed to open. Dad, he said quietly, is this true? Richard didn't answer. He stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. Loud in a room that had gone completely, utterly silent. 50 guests. Not one fork moving. Not one glass being refilled. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he'd underestimated one time too many. You have no idea what you've just done, he said. I closed the folder. I know exactly what I've done, I said. I've just started reading page 4. I never got to read page 4 out loud. I didn't need to. By the time Richard reached the parking lot, 3 guests had already pulled out their phones. One was the city councilman, quietly stepping outside to make a call I'd bet everything I owned was to his office's legal counsel. Another was a Belmont Club board member who, I later learned, sat on the audit committee of a bank Richard's company used for financing. Within a week, Denise Okafor was no longer alone. 2 former employees came forward once word spread. One had kept copies of invoices Richard thought had been destroyed years ago. By December, the Ashcombe Holdings account was under formal investigation. Richard stepped down from his own company for personal reasons, a phrase the local paper printed with visible skepticism. Pamela stopped hosting the founders' dinner. There wasn't much legacy left to toast to. Charlotte called me twice in the weeks after, not to apologize, to ask if I'd known this would happen when IRSVPD. Yes. I told her the truth. I hadn't known exactly how it would unfold. I only knew I was done being a punchline at my own family's table. Daniel didn't defend his parents. That surprised me more than anything else that happened. He'd spent our whole relationship smoothing things over, squeezing my hand under tables, asking me to let it go. But watching his father's empire built on numbers, I understood better than anyone in that room. Seemed to break something loose in him. I should have said something years ago, he told me one night, sitting on our kitchen floor, because neither of us had the energy to move to the couch every time she called your family practical, or poor, or whatever word she used that week. I let it happen because it was easier. You did, I said. But you're here now. We didn't cut his parents off completely. Pamela sends the occasional stiff, formal email. Richard hasn't spoken to me since that night, and I've made peace with that. Some people only respect what they can't control. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't something Richard Whitmore could manage with a smile and a condescending toast. Denise Okafor and I still talk. She started her own accounting firm this spring. I do her books. Free of charge, the least I could do for the woman who trusted a stranger with 11 pages that changed everything. I think about that wedding toast sometimes. Not for money like us, but she's got a good heart. She was half right. I do have a good heart. I also have a very good eye for numbers.